Hi, I'm Hannah Jones and welcome to this week's MASTS cast. A deadline I need to make you all aware of is that the deadline to submit an abstract to speak at the MASTS annual science meeting has been pushed back by 1 week. You have until the 21st of August to submit an abstract to speak at the MASTS annual science meeting from the 5th to the 9th of October. If you are considering an e-poster, more information about that is going to be coming really soon. So keep an eye out on our Twitter feed, our website, and also sign up to our mailing list if you haven't already done so. More information can be found on the MASTS website about that. In this week's edition, I chat to Professor Nicola Beaumont from Plymouth Marine Labs about an evidence statement that came out last month about how the marine environment and coastal environment affect our physical and mental well-being. So we'll be chatting about that later in this episode. I also chat to Dr Janelle Brethwaite about the scotMER publications that have been coming out throughout August, what has already been published and what can we expect in the later half of August. So we'll be talking all about that work too. And just a quick mention about the MASTS webinar series. This week's presenter was Dr. David McKee from the University of Strathclyde. His talk was titled Light in Sea, New Frontiers in Optics and Oceanography. Please check out the link that is below this video and you'll be able to find it there along with all our other previous MASTS webinar series. We have a couple of talks left before we head into the MASTS annual science meeting, so please check those out and register for a talk that interests you. And just a quick shout out congratulations to the 8 applicants who were successful in the small grants round from the Coastal Forum. They included 2 PhD students, Jack Sheehy and Danielle Sloan, so congratulations everyone and let us know how you get on. And now for my chat with Professor Nicola Beaumont. She is the Head of Science for Society and Seas at Plymouth Marine Labs, and we spoke about a recent evidence statement that she was involved in. This work was led by DEFRA and UKRI with collaboration between Plymouth Marine Labs and Exeter University. The review looked at the impact of marine and coastal environments on our physical and mental well-being. I first started off talking to Nicola asking what led to this study being created.
To start with, this was very much Rebecca Shelcock's work. I'm head of group in the group where she did her PhD and obviously was very aware of the work, but it was very much her study. So just to make that clear to begin with. What brought it about? Well, we've been doing work along these lines at the Plymouth Marine Lab for the last, well, I guess 20 years. We've been really interested for all that time in how humans affect the marine environment, but then equally how the marine environment affects humans. And I think you have to have that understanding that it's a two-way interaction going on. I think it's only by really understanding how the marine environment is impacting humans that then you can go on and manage the marine environment in the best possible way. I've always been a strong believer that whilst doing marine science for marine science sake is incredibly important, marine research is really important, but I think understanding that human dimension in research is also absolutely essential.
This study, this review looked at the benefits of marine and coastal environments on 2 aspects. So our mental well-being and health and our physical health. I was wondering, what were those key elements that help us in our mental well-being by being by the coast or just visiting it as well?
So with regard to our mental well-being, we see higher rates of calmness. We feel much more calm when we're close to the oceans. We feel more relaxed, and also we're often more revitalized. So it's a place to go to for restoration. The only exception to this, which is interesting, is if you visit an environment that's degraded, for example, by plastic pollution, it can actually have a negative effect. Yeah. And then we come away feeling, sad or upset. And I think that's really interesting, and a really important point here is that our visits to the coast are generically positive, and that's what came out very clearly from this review. But it's not a given. So if we don't look after the environment and we end up degrading it, then we'd not only lose those positive effects on our mental health, actually it can switch all the way around and become a negative effect on our mental health.
So absolutely, one is dependent on the other. If we go to an area that's beautiful, we're more likely to keep it well maintained, hopefully. And if we go an area that is not so well maintained and it's experiencing pollution, as you mentioned, plastic pollution, it just doesn't invoke positive action. Quite a lot of the time people feel disheartened and angered by what they see, but that doesn't always result in a positive action resulting from it. So I think that's a really good point to bring up from what was found in this review. But it's not just mentally how we feel about our lives, our well-being. It's also, being by the coast has an impact on our physical well-being as well. And I was just wondering, what does it mean? What can we learn from going to the coast and living by the coast?
What we saw with regard to physical health is that people living close to the coast generally were reporting higher levels of physical well-being, and also often we were finding that people who live near the coast, the exercise they took, the recreation that they took, was of a higher impact, so a more intense level of recreation. I think also we found some correlation with increased levels of vitamin D, which was really interesting in people living close to the coast, and that's something obviously we'd really like to follow up in the future. One of the things that was interesting here was that the data it's really hard to get really strong data on this, and there was huge variance around the UK, both on the amount of data that was available and also on the amounts of activity and the types of activity that people were undergoing. So there's a lot more to dig into, I think, there.
And we already touched upon the fact that some areas of our coasts are experiencing stress from various sources, so plastic pollution, but there's also the climate crisis that is happening, and that is affecting our coast all around the UK. So what do you think is going to be the long-term impact if action isn't taken to protect our waters, really, for our mental health and physical well-being, I guess, seeing as they're so interlinked?
Like you're saying about sea level rise and increased storminess, which makes the coast potentially less safe places to visit, and then also a huge amount of coastal development ongoing. So huge amounts of pressure on our coast at the minute, and if we don't do this development, and we don't take really positive action about some of these negative impacts, then we will obviously see a follow-on impact for our physical and mental health. And I think, I think this is such an important link to make, because when you're talking about conserving the marine environment, if you talk to people about, saving a certain snail or saving a certain sea fan, as beautiful as these creatures may be, I think it's really hard to get traction to make a change. Now, if you change the emphasis here a little bit, and instead of talking about that, say, actually, we'll still have those impacts, but we'll also have this impact on physical health. We'll have this impact on mental health. This will affect our whole society. It will affect our economy. Then I think you're much more likely to kind of get the ear of people and make people understand why we have to start to protect our environment and really take action.
If you would like to read the evidence statement in full, please check out the link that is below this video, and you'll be able to find out a lot more information about what Nicola and I spoke about as well. Next up is my chat with Dr Janelle Braithwaite. She is a senior policy officer within Marine Scotland and involved in scotMER. scotMER have been releasing papers and will be releasing more papers throughout the month of August, all about their research and on different topics as well. Before we got into what those topics are, I asked her to explain what is scotMER.
scotMER stands for the Scottish Marine Energy Research Programme, and it's an initiative that was established by Scottish Government to facilitate the sustainable development of offshore renewable energy in our waters. And so scotMER was set up to provide a coordinated and collaborative way of identifying not just what the evidence gaps are, but to prioritize these, but then actually trying to work internally and externally to then fill these key knowledge gaps, so we can get the research that we need, we can support the sound science needed for decision making for planning and project level.
Excellent, great. So you've been particularly busy throughout August preparing a whole series of papers on different topics that scotMER have been looking at. In total, throughout the month of August, there will be 16. We've had the first batch released, which were all about seabirds. There were 5 papers in total, and I was just wondering, what kind of information can we take from those 5 papers? Why is scotMER involved in seabird research?
Okay, so seabirds are a key limiting factor to offshore renewable development in Scottish waters. So if we put in, say, an offshore wind farm, there's potential implications on seabird populations. So there's a risk that birds may collide with offshore wind farms. they may be, if they don't kind of fly through the wind farms, they may be displaced from important commuting areas or foraging areas. And offshore wind can also form barrier effects with seabirds. So it's important before any development takes place that the assessments look at what are the potential impacts for seabirds to ensure that there's no adverse effects to protected populations, because Scotland is a home to internationally important breeding sites of seabirds. So the last thing we want to do is to interrupt any of those population growth.
And I guess those kind of impacts that you've just outlined for seabirds also very much heavily relates to the next batch of papers that were released, which were about marine mammals too, the impact of offshore renewables on the specific animal group. And there were 3 papers released on marine mammals as well. So that gives us 8 papers that have been released, and we're waiting for the next 8. What can we expect from those final 8?
Yeah, so all these papers are looking at how we do assessments and getting the information that we need in order to estimate what will happen to these populations. So with seabirds, it's, what are the population growth rates? What's their seabird behavior at sea? With marine mammals, it's establishing the sectoral marine plan for offshore wind for the next round of offshore wind leasing. A lot of those are actually further offshore where we don't have a lot of information about marine mammals. So that was establishing what are the baseline species or population demographics about that. So those have been released. Coming up, we've actually done we've done one looking at Sabellaria spinulosa reefs in Scottish waters. So looking at the status of that, we've got some underwater footage, new underwater footage that's been analysed. We're looking at salmon tagging. So up in the Moray Firth, we've got an array of acoustic tags for salmon, and so we're looking at, how do we improve the accuracy of the data coming off that. We've got even more seabird studies coming out, so some best practice recommendations when you're integrating seabird survey designs. And then I think the final one coming out is testing this new novel non-invasive tag for seabirds, which is a bit like, I'm probably going to describe this wrong and the researchers will be like, what are you doing? But it's a bit like a Fitbit for birds. So it's near infrared spectroscopy to then look at the actual oxygen use or energy use of seabirds. So it was trialing, so it's a pilot study. We've been trialing that and it's a first step in the development of these tags.
Excellent. And for people who want to check out the publications that have already come out and keep an eye on where they will be for those remaining few, where can we find that?
Yeah, so we're planning a series of blog posts to go along with these studies. So you can head to the Marine Scotland blogs. If you just Google it, hopefully it'll get you to the right site. All of them are being published on the Scottish Government website. You can also follow the Marine Scotland Twitter accounts. It will all be going online there. And then finally, we're planning, so part of the scotMER is communication of research outputs to industry, academics, advisors. And so we put on symposium events, 1 or 2 every year. So we've got one coming up in October, which will hopefully showcase all these reports and some other research activities that we're doing under the scotMER programme.
If you would like to check out those publications that have already been released, please look at the links that are below this video. They are on the Marine Scotland blog posts page. Alternatively, you can just keep an eye on your Twitter feed by following Marine Scotland, where they'll be publishing the links for the remaining papers that are soon to be coming out as well. That is everything from me, so have a great weekend and stay safe.